Welcome back, my friends, to King's Hill. Tonight's tantalizing tale takes us down a long, dark road where the trees seem to never stop and the rain seems to fall forever. And in the distance, what are those? They're the high beams. Catherine shivered as she turned onto the lonely stretch of road leading out of King's Hill. Her grandmother had warned her not to leave so late, but she stayed longer than she meant to, and now the darkness was pressing in around her little sedan. The only sound she could hear was the steady pitter-patter of rain and the rumbling of her tires against the pavement. Eventually, she pulled into a small gas station on the edge of town, fueling up for the long drive home. But as she stepped in to pay for her gas, a man caught her eye. He was tall, gangly even. He seemed too much for the small car he drove. A little red Mazda. Its lights flipped up, turning bright, and he closed the door. She shivered, and he just sat there. Looking at her, she quickly went and pumped her gas and started back on her journey. Curiously, as she left the gas station, the little red car turned around and began to follow her. She glanced into her rearview mirror and then back to the road. As she did, he flashed his high beams at her. Their glow was intense, blinding even, and once her eyes adjusted, she glanced back, and there he was, arm waving out of the car like some kind of fiend. She pressed the gas harder, yet he kept pace, flashing his beams once again. She scowled, a pit forming in her stomach. Who was he? Why was he following her? What would he do to her? She muttered something under her breath when the car behind her flashed his high beams again, and once again her eyes were forced to adjust to the blinding light. A new idea crossed her mind. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. Maybe he was impatient. So she slammed her brakes, hoping to force the man to pass, and yet he slowed down with her, both of their tires screeching to a halt, and then she floored it. But he still followed, his arm waving out of the window manically. She returned her eyes to the road again, looking for any way out, any turn to take, any house to seek shelter in, but she was alone. And the road was long. The lights behind her flashed again, once, then twice, again and again. She could hardly see from the blinding lights, her eyes not having time to adjust. So she tilted her mirrors away, hoping desperately that would allow her to focus on the road, but the lights did not stop. And finally, she saw it. A lone house sitting just off the path. She had to take a chance. She slammed her brakes, sliding into the driveway, pulling up to the house, unbuckling her seatbelt, and dashing to the door. And to her horror, the man followed, his beams still flashing madly, and then they stopped. He stopped. And as his door opened, a long, spindly leg followed. Then his torso, followed by a head of wild hair, and he glared at her until finally he spoke. "Call the police," he said, his voice urgent as he stepped closer to her. And then she saw it. Sitting in her back seat was a man she did not recognize, a man with wild eyes, and in his hand, glinting in the headlights, was a long, stained knife. And so, my dear friends, Catherine lived to see another day, lived to drive another drive. But you can bet the next time she gets in, she'll be checking her back seat. Will you? This has been our rendition of The High Beams, a famous urban legend adapted here for King's Hill Horror. Now remember, you never know what's coming next in King's Hill.